In February 2012, the body of 56-year-old Reverend Thomas Halstead was discovered in room 112 of the Golden Breeze Motel on the outskirts of Charlotte, North Carolina. An investigation uncovered the shocking double life of the respected preacher. In late 2011, a series of secret encounters and escalating tensions began to unfold, ultimately leading to a brutal murder that left a community in disbelief. Reverend Halstead, a 56-year-old preacher with decades of devoted service, had entered the motel around 9 p.m. the previous evening. Witnesses later described him walking with a woman who could not have been more different from the congregation he addressed every Sunday. She had fiery red hair, a striking presence, and wore a black dress that clung to her as if daring anyone to look away. Together, they disappeared into room 112, the door clicking shut behind them. That door would not open again until an anonymous 911 call brought the police to the scene just after midnight. Inside, they found the preacher sprawled on the carpet, his white shirt soaked through with blood. The scene was brutal. His chest had been stabbed repeatedly, each wound seemingly more savage than the last. A broken crucifix, its edges jagged and sharp, lay nearby in a pool of dark, congealed blood. The faint smell of cheap perfume still hung in the air, mingling with the metallic scent of death. The motel room, with its peeling wallpaper and flickering bedside lamp, had become the stage for a grotesque act of violence that no one could have anticipated. The investigation began swiftly. On February 17, 2012, the police questioned staff and guests at the motel. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, spoke hesitantly, recounting how she had seen the Reverend with the red-haired woman earlier that evening. She recalled hearing muffled voices from room 112, a mix of laughter, then arguing. Around midnight, there had been a loud crash, followed by silence. No one had thought to intervene until the call to 911 was placed by someone who chose to remain anonymous. Detectives soon turned their attention to the congregation Reverend Halstead had led for over 15 years. On February 20th, interviews with parishioners painted the image of a man deeply respected for his fiery sermons and tireless community outreach. Many described him as a man of unwavering faith, someone who had helped them through their darkest times. But as detectives dug deeper, whispers began to emerge, small, unspoken doubts that had lingered in the background of Halstead's otherwise spotless reputation. A few spoke of late-night absences, unexplained trips, and a growing distance between the Reverend and his once devoted daughter, Sarah. The idea that Halstead had secrets was hard for some to accept, but for others, it began to make a troubling kind of sense. Forensic evidence would soon provide the first significant lead. By February 25th, investigators had identified fingerprints on the broken crucifix, a key piece of evidence in the murder scene. The prints belonged to Destiny Ramirez, a 29-year-old woman with a history of violence and a life shaped by hardship. Destiny was no stranger to the police. Her name was often whispered on the streets, tied to stories of survival, betrayal, and desperation. When Destiny was located and brought in for questioning, she didn't deny having been in room 112. However, she claimed she had no hand in the murder. Instead, she insisted she had fled the scene when an unknown man barged into the room, shouting angrily, She painted a picture of chaos, a struggle, blood, and a preacher begging for mercy before she ran out into the night, leaving him behind. But her story raised as many questions as it answered. Who was the man she described? Why had she been in the room with Halstead to begin with? And most crucially, why had she chosen to remain silent until she was forced to speak? The investigation deepened. By March 1st, 2012, detectives unearthed a disturbing pattern. Reverend Halstead, they discovered, had been frequenting the Golden Breeze Motel for months, booking room 112 under an alias. It was a clandestine life, far removed from the sermons he delivered on Sundays. Halstead wasn't just meeting destiny. He had a history of encounters with several women, all of them tied to the same web of exploitation, danger, and secrecy. As detectives pieced together the timeline, a new layer of complexity emerged. Rumors linked the Reverend's secret visits to the operations of a local drug ring. Allegations of blackmail began to surface, suggesting that Halstead might have been more than just a client to some of these women. The motel, it seemed, was not only a place for illicit rendezvous, but a hub for something far darker. The evidence continued to mount, but the motive remained elusive. Was the murder a crime of passion? A botched extortion attempt? Or was it a calculated act by someone Halstead had crossed in his hidden life? As the case unfolded, one thing became clear. The preacher's secret life was unraveling, and with it came a web of betrayal, vengeance, and devastating consequences that no one could have foreseen. Reverend Thomas Halstead's life was a paradox. To his congregation, he was a beacon of hope, a man who had weathered storms and come out stronger. Yet, beneath the polished sermons and comforting words, there was a fracture, a deep, unresolved loneliness that grew after the death of his wife in 2008. The loss had left him hollow, and while he preached about redemption, he found himself unable to follow his own advice. By the end of 2011, Halstead's personal life was quietly unraveling, though few saw the cracks beneath the surface. Destiny Ramirez entered Halstead's life during this vulnerable time. By early 2012, their paths crossed at the Golden Breeze Motel, a place where the underbelly of society met in secrecy. Destiny, only 29, but with the weariness of someone much older, was a survivor in the truest sense. She had been orphaned young and spent most of her life navigating dangerous waters. Her fiery personality and sharp wit kept her afloat, but her circumstances had forced her into a precarious existence. By the time she met Halstead, she was deeply entangled in the manipulative grip of Johnny Jax Behringer, a local drug dealer and small-time pimp. Jax was a man who thrived on control. His network revolved around coercion and fear, and Destiny was both his pawn and his prisoner. He saw her charm and striking looks as tools to exploit wealthy men, leveraging their guilt and indiscretions for blackmail. When Jax learned that Halstead was one of Destiny's clients, he immediately saw an opportunity. A preacher, especially one as respected as Halstead, was the perfect target. But what Jax underestimated was the complexity of the relationship between Halstead and Destiny. It began as a transactional arrangement. Halstead, desperate for solace and connection, found in Destiny a reprieve from his internal struggles. Destiny, though hardened by years of survival, saw glimpses of vulnerability in him that reminded her of a time when she had not yet built her walls. Over time, their meetings grew more personal, less mechanical. Halstead, blinded by his own desires, began to believe he could save her, offering promises of redemption that Destiny knew she could never afford to accept. By January 2012, the dynamic between them had shifted. Jax, sensing the emotional entanglement, pushed Destiny to demand money from Halstead. When she hesitated, fearing the consequences, Jax tightened his control, threatening her with violence and the loss of what little freedom she had left. The pressure mounted, and by February, Destiny found herself trapped between her growing attachment to Halstead and Jax's ruthless demands. On the evening of February 16, 2012, Halstead arrived at the Golden Breeze Motel under his usual alias. Room 112 had become their secret world, a place where the lines between right and wrong blurred. But that night, the atmosphere was different. Destiny had been forced by Jax to confront Halstead, to demand more money or face dire consequences. She entered the room carrying not just her own fears, but the weight of Jax's threats. The conversation between them quickly turned tense. Halstead, already guilt-ridden and struggling to reconcile his actions with his faith, refused to pay any more. He believed his relationship with Destiny was genuine, something beyond the transactional world she had come from. Destiny, desperate to avoid Jax's wrath, pleaded with him to reconsider. Her voice, though firm, carried an undertone of despair. As the minutes ticked by, the tension escalated. Halstead, for all his compassion, could not see beyond his own perspective. He accused her of betrayal, of using him for her gain. Destiny, cornered and overwhelmed, lashed out, revealing the depth of Jax's involvement and the control he had over her life. The revelations hit Halstead like a blow. The man who had seen himself as a savior now realized he had been a pawn in a larger, darker game. The argument grew heated. Voices rose, emotions boiled over, and the line between reason and impulse blurred. In the chaos, Destiny's movements became frantic, and the air in the room thickened with tension. A loud crash echoed as Halstead stumbled, knocking over a chair. The noise, though brief, marked a turning point, a moment where desperation turned to violence. What happened in the seconds that followed remains a blur. The struggle left the room in disarray. A small crucifix that Halstead often carried was broken, its sharp edges soaked in blood. When it was over, Halstead lay lifeless on the carpet, his chest riddled with stab wounds. The room fell silent except for Destiny's shallow breaths as she realized the magnitude of what had occurred. Fearing for her life and knowing Jax's wrath would be swift, Destiny fled. She left the room in a panic, the sound of her heels clicking against the pavement as she disappeared into the night. Somewhere, in the darkness, she made the call to 911, her voice trembling as she reported what she had witnessed without revealing her identity. By the time the police arrived, the motel was quiet again, the neon sign casting eerie shadows over the scene of a crime that would shock an entire town. The events of that night marked the culmination of months of secrets, manipulation, and desperation. The preacher's secret life had collided with Destiny's turbulent world, setting off a chain of events that no one could have foreseen. The investigation into Reverend Thomas Halstead's murder took an unexpected turn when, in early March 2012, a homeless man named Arthur Harper came forward with crucial information. Arthur had been sleeping near the Golden Breeze Motel on the night of February 16th. His life had left him overlooked by society, but his sharp memory and observant nature became invaluable to the case. He described seeing a third figure leaving room 112 around the time of the murder. This figure, a man dressed in a dark hoodie, moved quickly and suspiciously, glancing over his shoulder before vanishing into the shadows of the motel parking lot. The revelation complicated what had seemed like a straightforward case. Until Arthur's account, the evidence pointed squarely at Destiny Ramirez. Now, the detectives were faced with the possibility that a third person had been involved, or even that Destiny herself might have been a pawn in a larger, more sinister game. Around the same time, the discovery of Halstead's private journal added another layer of intrigue. The journal, found tucked behind the bookshelf in his modest home, was small and worn, its pages filled with cryptic entries. In one entry, dated just weeks before his death, Halstead wrote about his fear of a shadow that had begun to loom over his life. The preacher, who had always projected confidence and strength, seemed to be wrestling with deep regret and an unshakable sense of foreboding. The entries hinted at a man torn between his faith and his failings, haunted by choices he could no longer undo. The journal became a focal point for the detectives, raising questions about who or what this shadow could be. Was it a person? A metaphor for his guilt? Or something else entirely? The more they read, the more they realized how much Halstead had kept hidden, even from those closest to him. As the investigation deepened, the spotlight turned to Sarah Halstead, the preacher's estranged daughter. Sarah, now 35, had lived most of her adult life away from her father, distancing herself from the man she once adored. The relationship had fractured during her mother's illness, when Sarah discovered her father's infidelity. The betrayal was something she could never forgive, and by the time of his death, they had not spoken in years. When detectives reached out to Sarah in late March 2012, she was hesitant to cooperate. But as they delved into her life, troubling connections emerged. Sarah had ties to Johnny Jax Behringer, the drug dealer linked to the motel and Destiny. Jax had once been a fleeting part of Sarah's rebellious past, a dangerous figure she had kept secret from her father. Though Sarah insisted she had no current dealings with him, her evasiveness raised suspicions. Had her estrangement from Halstead turned into something darker? Or was she simply another victim of Jax's manipulative web? While the investigation unfolded, Destiny Ramirez's life was unraveling in parallel. By April 2012, her fear of Jax had reached its peak. She knew too much about his operations, and with the police closing in, she realized she was expendable. Despite the risks, Destiny made a decision that would change everything. She confronted Jax, meeting him in a desolate warehouse late one night. The confrontation was tense, the air thick with the unspoken knowledge that only one of them might leave the encounter alive. Destiny's actions were not driven by heroism, but by desperation. She was tired of living under Jax's thumb, tired of being used and discarded. The showdown revealed the full extent of Jax's role in orchestrating Halstead's blackmail. Jax had seen the preacher as an easy target, a man weighed down by guilt and ripe for exploitation. When Halstead refused to comply, Jax had escalated his threats, using Destiny as his pawn. Though Destiny survived the encounter, her revelations to the police sealed Jax's fate. By the time the trial began in June 2012, the case had become a national sensation. The courtroom was packed daily, with journalists and onlookers eager to hear the sordid details of Halstead's double life. The prosecution painted a damning picture of Jax as a manipulative predator who had exploited both Destiny and Halstead. They described how Jax had pushed Halstead to his breaking point, creating a volatile situation that led to his murder. Destiny's testimony was raw and emotional. She spoke about the years of abuse and control she had endured under Jax, about the guilt she carried for her role in Halstead's downfall, and about the fear that had driven her actions on the night of the murder. Though her words painted her as a victim, they also revealed her complicity in the blackmail scheme. The jury was moved by her honesty, but could not ignore her involvement in Jax's crimes. When the verdict came, it was bittersweet. Destiny was acquitted of Halstead's murder, her claims of self-defense bolstered by the evidence of Jax's threats. However, she faced lesser charges related to blackmail and was sentenced to probation and community service. For Jax, there was no leniency. His crimes, including extortion, assault, and conspiracy, earned him a lengthy prison sentence. Yet, even as the trial concluded, questions lingered. The figure in the dark hoodie, seen by Arthur Harper, was never identified, leaving an unsettling mystery at the heart of the case. Some speculated that it was an accomplice of Jax's. Others believed it might have been someone from Halstead's own past. A shadow returned to haunt him in his final moments. In the aftermath, the characters were left to pick up the pieces. Sarah Halstead, though cleared of involvement, faced the painful task of reconciling her father's legacy with the truth of his life. Destiny, free but scarred, began working with women trapped in cycles of abuse and exploitation, determined to turn her pain into purpose. And the town, once captivated by Halstead's sermons, was left grappling with the duality of a man who preached redemption but could not save himself. The case of Reverend Thomas Halstead's murder left a mark on everyone it touched. The small congregation he had served for over 2 decades found itself at a crossroads. They had adored him, seeing him as a guiding light in their lives. For many, Halstead had been the one who helped them through personal crises, celebrated their victories, and stood as a pillar of unwavering faith. But after the trial, their image of him was shattered. By July 2012, the church pews, once filled with devoted followers, stood half empty. Whispers of disbelief and betrayal lingered in the air during every sermon, delivered now by an interim preacher who struggled to connect with an audience still grappling with the truth. The congregation tried to reconcile the man they knew with the man revealed in the courtroom. Some members clung to their memories of his compassion and guidance, refusing to let the revelations tarnish the legacy he had built. Others could not move past the betrayal. They felt duped, as though Halstead's moral failings had made hypocrites of them all. His private life, filled with secret visits to the Golden Breeze Motel, entanglements with dangerous people, and actions that contradicted every word he had preached, hung over them like a dark cloud. Halstead's estranged daughter, Sarah, carried the heaviest burden. The revelations about her father reopened old wounds she thought had healed. She had walked away from him years earlier, angered by his infidelity during her mother's illness, and devastated by the fracture it had caused in their family. But after the trial, Sarah found herself in the harsh spotlight of public scrutiny. people questioned her own role in the events, especially after her connections to Johnny Jacks Behringer were revealed. By late 2012, Sarah tried to rebuild her life in small, quiet ways. She moved to a new city, far from the town where her father's name was still a topic of hushed conversations. She took a job in social work, a field that had always called to her, but that she had abandoned after the estrangement. Despite the distance, the weight of her father's actions and her own unresolved guilt lingered. She replayed their last conversation in her mind, wondering if she could have changed things. Could she have intervened? Could she have saved him? The questions haunted her, and the answers never came. Destiny Ramirez, too, faced the daunting task of rebuilding her life. Acquitted of the murder, but convicted on lesser charges related to the blackmail scheme, she spent the next 2 years on probation. Destiny, however, refused to let her past define her. By early 2013, she had channeled her pain into something meaningful. With the help of a local nonprofit, she began a support group for women who, like her, had been caught in cycles of exploitation and abuse. The group met every Thursday evening in a small community center, its dimly lit room filled with women from all walks of life, each carrying her own story of survival. For Destiny, the support group became more than just a project. It was her redemption. She shared her experiences openly, holding nothing back about her time under Jax's control or the mistakes she had made in her desperation to escape his grip. Her honesty became a beacon for others, giving them the courage to speak their truths. Some of the women were still trapped in situations that mirrored Destiny's former life. Others were taking their first steps toward freedom. Together, they formed a network of resilience, determined to break the cycles that had held them captive for so long. As the years passed, the memory of Halstead's murder faded from the headlines, but its ripples remained. The Golden Breeze Motel, once a hub for shadowy dealings, was shut down in 2014, its dilapidated facade a grim reminder of the events that had unfolded there. The motel's closure was celebrated by the local community, who hoped it would bring an end to the illicit activities that had plagued the area for years. Yet, for all the closures and endings, the questions surrounding Room 112 never fully disappeared. Halstead's journal, with its cryptic entries about a looming shadow, left investigators and those who knew him speculating about what he truly feared in his final days. Was it Jax? Was it the weight of his own guilt? Or was there something or someone else tied to the night of his murder that had yet to be uncovered? The congregation, too, found themselves changed by the events. For some, their faith deepened as they sought solace in their beliefs, choosing to forgive Halstead and focus on the lessons he had taught them. For others, the betrayal was too much, leading them to question not just their faith in him, but in the very institution he represented. By 2015, the church had a new preacher, but it still bore the scars of Halstead's secrets. The case became a cautionary tale about the fragility of public personas and the destructive power of secrets. It showed how the choices of one man could ripple outward, touching the lives of those who loved him, those who trusted him, and even those who barely knew him. Halstead's death was not just the end of his life, but the beginning of a chain of events that forever altered the lives of Sarah, Destiny, and an entire community. This haunting story of betrayal, obsession, and redemption lingers in the mind long after its final chapter. It leaves behind a chilling question: what truly happened in room 112 that night? And how many lives were forever changed by the preacher's secret descent into the shadows? Don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss our daily updates. Also, check out another shocking case. Newlywed husband beats wife to death on exclusive Fiji honeymoon. Let us know your thoughts in the comments.